Have you ever wondered what the invisible architecture is that makes or breaks an organization? Well, today we're going on a theoretical journey to explore exactly that: social structure. It's the framework that shapes every single workplace, from the tiniest startup all the way to a massive government agency. And right from the start, let's be really clear about the stakes here. Getting structure wrong isn't just some abstract academic problem. It has absolutely catastrophic real-world consequences. This quote, referring to the tragic loss of 2 space shuttle crews, is a chilling reminder that failures in organizing can and do destroy lives. So what exactly is the social structure we're talking about? You can think of it as the invisible skeleton that gives an organization its shape, its integrity. But here's the thing. The skeleton isn't just one single fixed design. Our understanding of it has evolved dramatically over time, and that journey really kicks off with one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. Our story begins with the German sociologist Max Weber. His theory of bureaucracy became the foundational blueprint, really the starting point, for the entire modern perspective on organizational structure. Weber laid out this model with incredible detail. Now, you have to remember, elements like selection based on technical qualifications or fixed salaries, these weren't just descriptions. For the time, they were radical ideas. The whole point was to build a system on pure rationality, a kind of moral alternative to the rampant nepotism and abuse of power that was so common in the pre-industrial world. Every single point you see here was designed for impartiality and, of course, efficiency. Okay, now this is a really crucial point and a super common misunderstanding. When Weber used the word ideal, he didn't mean it was perfect or the best. He was creating what's called an ideal type, a pure abstract concept that you can use as a benchmark for analysis. It's a bit like how a physicist uses the concept of an ideal gas to understand how real gases work. It's a tool for thinking. But here's the fascinating part. Even Weber, the architect of this whole theory, saw the potential dark side. He warned of the iron cage, a system so obsessed with rules and efficiency that it could strip away our humanity, our spirit. It's a fear that's been brilliantly satirized in art, like in Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22 or Terry Gilliam's amazing film Brazil. So this awareness of bureaucracy's dark side, its limitations, it sparked a major shift in thinking. People moved away from searching for that single best way to organize, and a new idea began to emerge. What if the best structure isn't universal? What if it depends? What if it's contingent on the situation? And that is the absolute core of contingency theory. Some of the early contingency theorists, Tom Burns and George Stocker in particular, came up with this famous and hugely influential dichotomy. What they found was that these rigid, hierarchical, mechanistic structures, they work great in stable, predictable environments, but in dynamic, constantly changing environments that demand innovation, you need something else. You need flexible, decentralized, organic forms. It's all about finding the right fit for your environment. Building on that exact idea, Lawrence and Lorsch introduced 2 crucial interlocking concepts. First, you have differentiation. That's how specialized your departments are from one another. And second, you have integration, which is how well they all coordinate to get things done. Now, the key insight here is that the most successful companies don't just try to maximize one or the other. They find the right balance between the two that fits their specific environment. And this is where someone like Henry Mintzberg comes in and synthesizes all these contingency ideas into this really practical and famous framework. He identified these 5 distinct configurations. And just look at how each form, from the simple structure of a startup to the innovative adhocracy you'd find at a biotech firm, is really a unique combination of structural elements that's perfectly adapted for a specific context. Okay, so up to this point, we've mostly been looking at structure as a kind of static design, like a snapshot in time. But what happens when we start to see it as something that isn't just designed, but something that grows and changes and evolves over the entire life of an organization? Larry Greiner's famous life cycle model shows us exactly that. He argued that organizations move through these predictable stages of growth. But here's the crucial part. Each period of calm, evolutionary growth eventually ends in a revolutionary crisis, a crisis of leadership or autonomy or control, and it's that crisis that forces a fundamental change in the social structure, allowing the organization to keep developing. This leads us to a really fascinating, if slightly mind-bending, idea from Anthony Giddens called structuration theory.
It kind of bridges the gap between seeing structure as a cage that traps us and seeing it as something we create. The critical point is that it's a two-way street. The structure of our organization, of course, influences our actions, but our everyday actions also constantly create and reinforce that very structure.
And the source text uses a fantastic metaphor to really capture this complex idea. M.C. Escher's drawing of two hands, where each hand is drawing the other one into existence. That is the essence of this duality of structure and agency. Structure shapes what agents do, and the actions of agents create the structure, all in a continuous, inseparable, and recursive cycle. So once you start to see structure as this dynamic thing, it opens the door to an even more radical way of thinking about it. From the symbolic and postmodern perspectives, structure isn't an objective thing at all. Instead, it's seen as an ongoing social accomplishment, like a story that we're all creating and telling together. This quote from the hugely influential theorist Carl Weick just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures this fundamental shift. See how the focus moves away from the noun, organization, this static thing, to the verb, organizing, a continuous, emerging process of human interaction and just making sense of things. From this perspective, what we call structure really just emerges from this dynamic dance between two modes of organizing. On the one hand, you've got routines, the stable, repeated patterns that preserve knowledge, kind of like a well-known recipe. And on the other hand, you've got improvisation, the creative, spontaneous actions that bring in change, a lot like a jazz musician's solo over a familiar melody. And this perspective really helps us understand things like communities of practice. Just think about the informal groups you rely on at work, the real experts you go to for advice, no matter what their official title is. These self-organizing networks are where so much of the real learning and innovation actually happens, often completely outside or even in spite of the formal org chart. Postmodern thinkers take this deconstruction even further. They analyze the very language we use for structure, words like hierarchy or control, to reveal their hidden links to power. They argue that traditional structures often end up privileging certain groups while pushing others to the margins. And this leads them to imagine radical alternatives, things that are more equitable, more democratic, and more de-differentiated, which just means they have fewer rigid roles and boundaries. So, we've journeyed all the way from seeing structure as a fixed blueprint to seeing it as a dynamic process, and finally as a contested story that's embedded with power. And this leaves us with the central question of organization theory today, the question right there on your screen. Is structure a reality that we can engineer, or is it a fluid story that we are all constantly rewriting?